Welcome everyone, and every week when we turn in video assignments, I always want to make sure to go through it. So this video is going to go over the correct answers to the video assignment. And again, the video assignment is graded based on the 0, 1, 2 scale. And really, to get 2 out of 2, all you need to do is make sure it's complete, and it shows evidence that you completed the videos, like you watched them and you're using the ideas in answering the questions. So that's really what we're looking for in terms of grading. Correct and incorrect is not a part of the equation there, right? So if you get it wrong, that is okay. But as we go through these videos, please make sure to open up your document and make the corrections. All right, and with that, we're going to dig in. Exercise 1. We want to know if the average time spent on social media by Minnesotan teens is more than the average time spent on social media by U.S. teens. And so then the first part is asking, identify explanatory, response, and confounding variables, determine levels to the variables if possible. And when I write these out, rather than write out explanatory, response, and confounding, I always tend to just abbreviate this as EV, explanatory variable, RV, response variable, and CV for confounding variable. Okay, and so EV, RV, and CV, we needed to define each of these in this context. Now, EV, explanatory variable, and response variable, those can sometimes get interchanged easily, but again, connecting these concepts to past language might be a little helpful. Explanatory variable is a lot like it is the same as your independent variable, okay? So if that is helpful in remembering this, please use that. Response variable is then a lot like our dependent variable, okay? So independent variable is one that does not change as a result of picking the other, right? That would be the dependent. So independent variable is manipulated by the researcher, something that the researcher can control. And so in this scenario, what is the thing that the researcher is choosing and is controlling? Well, that might be a trickier question. So maybe it's useful to actually sidestep and say, okay, well, what is changing as a result of something being chosen by the researcher, right? And this is often the quantity that is being measured too. So the response variable is often what is being measured. And so with that framing, I think it's actually easier to see that the thing that is being measured is time, right? So I'm going to say that response variable is time. Okay, now this is not enough for full credit if this were graded based on correctness. Everything in statistics is sensitive to details, and so we want to communicate as many details as possible. And so I'm going to say it's time, what time spent on social media. Time spent on social media, right? That's the value that I'm measuring in each of these scenarios. So then the question is, that is the thing that is changing, right? That is responding to the change of the independent variable. So what is influencing time spent on social media? Well, I would actually say that's where like the different group type, so either Minnesotan teens or U.S. teens, comes into play. So how do we describe that? Well, I might just say like geographic region. Okay, so the researcher is choosing in this instance the geographic region to study, right? They could have chosen, say, Florida versus U.S. teens or Arizona versus U.S. teens, right? But instead they're looking at Minnesotan teens. So they're specifically choosing a targeted group. And so that's our independent variable. Now confounding, this is, for right now, we'll clarify this in a little in later modules, but confounding variables are those that are effectively influencing the variables that we're working with without us directly measuring them. So what is influencing either geographic region or time spent on social media that we're not accounting for as we know? And I would say, well, this could be something like access to technology, right? Do they have a smartphone? Do they have a laptop or computer? Because that makes social media easier to access, right? So that's going to influence the time spent on social media. So it's something that's outside of the experiment as it's stated that could influence the results. Okay. So there's not one single answer for the confounding variable. You could have, like, this is my example. You could come up with many other things because there's many other things that could influence either of these variables. Okay. Part B. What statistical test might be appropriate in this context? Well, what are we comparing? So I'm thinking through that decision tree, right? So the first question was number of populations. That was the first kind of branch. And then the second branch, or the second thing, was quantity of interest. And so if I can answer those two, that will tell me what test I have to do. So in this case, number of populations, so number of groups that I'm studying, right? Well, I think that's Minnesotan teens, 1, and U.S. teens, 2. So I'd say there's 2 populations. And then in those populations, what are we looking at? Well, we're measuring, right, the time spent on social media. So, but that's average time, right? So average time. So as soon as we're looking at an average, that is going to force a type of test very quickly. And so we have 2 populations and the quantity of interest is an average. According to that test tree, please review on your own, it'd be a 2 sample T or Z test. Okay, we'd have to clarify which one as we get more details from the context. But that would be the answer for this one. All right. So we have number 1 all done. Identified explanatory response and confounding variables. Again, confounding variables can be anything that's not in the experiment that we've or anything that we haven't considered in the experiment. Explanatory variables are independent variables that are being chosen by us or the researcher, and then dependent is what is being measured, what is changing as a result of that choice of an independent variable. On to number 2. Okay, a curious professor wonders if students in their course are consuming more than a healthy amount of caffeine each day. That could be me, that professor that is wondering about this. And so we do this form of the hypothesis test. So consuming an average of 400 milligrams of caffeine in a day, right? So that's the null. And then the alternative is that students in the course are consuming more than, right? So if I were to write this out in symbols, I might do something like HO mu is equal to 400, and HA or H1, depending on which notation you prefer, I'd do something like mu is greater than 400. Okay, couple notes on this. Null always equals in this course. Okay, different ways of doing it I understand throughout history, but for this course our convention is going to be always equals in the null. And the other thing that I have not done is I would need to define what mu is in words. So this would be like average, and I'm not going to have enough room. Average amount, I'll maybe zoom in so we can see it a little bit more easily. Average amount of caffeine in a day. Okay, I managed to sneak it in, but so 3 things with a hypothesis test: null, alternate, and then the definition of the symbol that you use, if you want to use symbols. Okay, and that wasn't even the question, so that was more like just commentary. Part A. So the professor collects data and from students, and it was found to be statistically significant at a 5% significance level. What's the possible p-value? Okay, so this is an aside. This is not related to the answer, but if we have statistical significance, that is the same as rejecting the null, right? That means our data is wonky. Hey, pay attention here. Our default idea does not apply. And similarly, if we reject the null, we know that P is less than or equal to alpha, whatever we set alpha to be. okay, or whatever alpha is stated to be, okay? Now, hand in hand with that, so that's either one line of decision making, or you have that there's not statistical significance, and in which case that is the same as fail to reject the null. And that's the same as saying p is greater than alpha, okay? One important thing, and this is coming up in the discussion boards, please pay attention to those, please look at those, and please read all those, but fail to reject the null is super, super important. It is a quote-unquote swear word, okay, so don't swear at me, to say accept, prove, like it is certain, right? We can't do that because the data that we're collecting is trying to show evidence for the alternative. And so we can't use that language of prove, accept. So don't use that in this course. Outside of this course, have at it, okay? Now, that aside, right, we have these two things, right? And so then what were we even be asked? Oh, what's the possible p-value? Okay, so found to be statistical significant, right? So then at a 5% significance level. So what I need, right, needs to be less than, the p-value that I need to report needs to be less than or equal to alpha. So literally anything that's less than 5%. So I might say p is 0.02. Sure. Many answers, but anything that's less than 5% would be just fine here. Okay. And then part B may have been answered in this as well. So what decision, right? So in terms of a decision, that's rejecting or fail to reject. So if my p-value is low, I would say I would reject the null. Okay? And then in rejecting the null, the only type of error, there's two types. If we reject the null, we could have a possible, let me change colors here. So here we could have a type 1 error if we reject, and if we fail to reject, the only type of error we could make is a type 2. Okay, and so then I'm going to say we reject the null, and then we could make a type 1 error. Is possible. Not saying it happened, but it could be the case. All right. So there we go. Exercise 2. That decision and interpretation gets to be a little tricky. Language, as we've been talking about, is sensitive and details are important. So those are the main two exercises in the videos. Again, there's that, or from the video assignment, there is that third question. We're not going to worry about answering that because that's a personal response. So look forward to reading that and reach out on the discussion boards, email, by Just Ask Hours if I can be of help.